and welcome back to the Creative Catholics Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Cahill. Go ahead and grab whatever creative piece you're working on today, whether that's knitting or a piece of woodworking or even just the laundry. And let's go ahead and work on it together while we talk to Father Michael Rossmann. Father Michael Rossmann is a Jesuit priest at Loyola University in Chicago, where he serves in campus ministry and teaches theology. He's the creator of the 1 Minute Homily and 1 Minute Jesuit video series, and he also writes The Ruckus on Substack. He is the author of 2 books, The Freedom of Missing Out and Online Pre-Evangelization. Now, this is a very, very special episode for me because I actually went to school with Father Michael. And when I asked him if he wanted to be on the episode, he was the first one that I asked. And he was so kind and supportive and enthusiastic that his response actually gave me the courage to reach out to other guests and invite them onto the show. So I'm so excited to have Father Michael on the show with us today. Father Michael, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Alex. It's great to be with you.
We actually both went to a Catholic school together. So tell me, how has that stayed with you as you become a Jesuit and a teacher?
Yeah, I found it to be an environment in which it was normal to be religious. It was normal to be Catholic, and that very much shaped my later trajectory. Additionally, too, I had some great teachers who were, influential in getting me to become a better writer and thinker. That has been very formative. It was a family and sort of environment. There weren't many of us, so everyone was sort of expected to do everything. I'd say that too was significant in later work and ministry when I'm trying to juggle a number of different responsibilities.
Tell us a little bit about your vocation story. How were you called?
Yeah, so when I was at that Catholic school, I wasn't thinking about the priesthood at that time. My image of a priest was older gentlemen up at the altar on Sunday, and I respected them, but I never really considered it as a possibility for my life. In retrospect, I see how the building blocks for my vocation were very much there and had been present for quite some time. But it's as if I kind of connected the different pieces when I was in college. And I'd say in college was particularly significant because I met a number of priests on a personal level. And some of those priests, they lived in my dormitory or they were my professors. And they really expanded my understanding of what a priest could be. And they got the wheels turning, you could say. And so when I was in college, I started thinking about religious life and the priesthood in a really significant manner.
You hear so many different kind of vocation stories of how some people felt kind of dragged into it, and other people very much felt like it was God calling them and they were starting to create with God this idea of what kind of priest they were being called to be. How did you feel?
So as I mentioned, it's not as if when I was in it, it felt like a really straight path. Though in retrospect, I see how, there definitely was a linear narrative. There were different experiences that then kind of led me to the next step and led me eventually to kind of put these different pieces together. But when I was in the middle of it, it wasn't always so clear. When this idea really emerged, there was some initial kind of rejection of the idea. I thought, God, you're calling the wrong person, or this can't be really the case. I just had expected that someday I would get married and have a family, and that's a wonderful vocation. And yet, even from the beginning, when I started kind of putting these pieces together, there was the sense that yeah, you know what? There may be something deeper here, and this really does fit me. I have heard it described, a vocation described as the happy inability to think of anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And that at least matched my own experience, because there was this thought like, okay, come on, God, why can't I just do something normal? And yet there was also a joy there from the beginning. And as you were mentioning, the kind of this element of creation, or co-creation with God, that very much strikes a chord. I mean, in one sense, God doesn't need us. God is God. And yet, when we kind of look back on the story of history, we see that, God seems to choose to, work through God's people. And being part of this larger endeavor was very exciting.
So you decided to join the Jesuits. Did you kind of look at a number of different groups first, or was it always kind of, no, I'm going to be joining the Jesuits?
I looked at least somewhat at other groups, though from the beginning I was particularly drawn to the Jesuits, even though initially I only really knew one Jesuit who had been a professor of mine. But I knew about kind of the intellectual tradition of the Jesuits. And also during my freshman year of college is when, for the first time, I encountered the spiritual exercises, this method of retreat and prayer developed by St. Ignatius. And it was a way of praying and seeing the world that very much resonated with me. And then when I started to reach out to the Jesuits and meet more Jesuits, I felt at home with this group of people.
Can you share a bit more about those spiritual exercises that you're talking about?
Yeah, so St. Ignatius, who lived in the 16th century, put together this method of retreat that was very much coming out of his own experience. Ignatius himself had a rather dramatic religious conversion or reversion, and he also accompanied many people. And so the exercises are, in a sense, his kind of notes on retreats and the spiritual life that he developed over a number of years. And this method of retreat can be adapted in different forms. Traditionally, the exercises have been done in the context of a 30-day silent retreat, which every Jesuit does twice in his life. I did it for the second time about a year and a half ago or so. But then the exercises can be done by lay people, non-Jesuits, and in different forms. And so one might do the full version, but over perhaps 9 months rather than kind of hiding away for a month at a retreat house. Or one can get a taste of the spiritual exercises in the context of a weekend retreat. And one of the things that I really enjoy, especially during the summers now, is going to some retreat houses and kind of preaching a form of the spiritual exercises over about 3.5 days. That tends to be much more accessible to, normal working people with families.
And do you find a lot of lay people come and do those sorts of retreats?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'd say Ignatian spirituality in general seems to be quite resonant with normal lay people. It's a very practical spirituality. Jesuits are known as being contemplatives in action. And our charism is, really about ministering in the world. We are not kind of tucked away in a monastery. And I think that very kind of practical, kind of hands-on experience seems to be quite relevant for many people.
And isn't it also, I'm trying to remember now, I heard somebody recently talk about it, is Ignatian imagination? That's a phrase, isn't it?
Yeah, Ignatian imagination or Ignatian
Yeah,
contemplation.
yeah.
Exactly. So this is a form of prayer in which one's imagination plays a significant part. And Ignatian contemplation would make up a significant part of those spiritual exercises. So one is typically asked to kind of imagine the scene and place oneself in primarily gospel scenes. And that might be just sort of, standing on the side and observing, but oftentimes one is invited to perhaps, embody one of the people in a particular gospel scene and interact with Jesus or others in that scene. For someone who does not have experience with this form of prayer, it might sound a little strange. One might think like, okay, you're praying with your imagination. Does that mean that like everything that you imagine is, something God is directly communicating to you? Not necessarily. And yet at the same time, when we kind of use our imagination, we might let our guard down quite a bit such that God can communicate with us in a particular manner. Additionally, when we read, the Gospels, many details are left out. And so we might think like, oh, actually, I've never thought about the fact that, this aspect of this particular gospel scene isn't actually described. And we can kind of use our imagination to sort of fill out the picture. And oftentimes that facilitates a deepened encounter with Christ and the other people in that scene.
It's a phrase I literally just came across a couple weeks ago, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Because I think a lot of people struggle sometimes with reading the Bible and putting themselves, it's easy to say, oh, the Jewish people did this or they did that, and not actually putting themselves in those
Right.
moments. Because obviously, God is speaking to us through the Bible, and
Yes.
how, admittedly, this is my first year reading the Bible cover to cover. I'm kind of uncovering quite a lot. But Ignatian imagination was something that recently came out, where it was like, if you're struggling with a bit,
Yeah.
put yourself there, see what that does. It's absolutely, I think that's amazing. And do you find, because you're teaching now at Loyola in Chicago, do you find a lot of these students, first of all, are they kind of active in their faith, or how are you finding that at a Catholic university?
Yeah, it really spans the spectrum. And
Does it?
my experience, my first semester is quite a bit different than my second semester. My first semester, I really got kind of a cross sample of the university. And, I would say that this would be pretty typical for college students today. There were a decent number who were pretty non-religious. There were a decent number who were inactive Catholics or other Christians. But then there was also a good number who were, active Catholics or other Christians. This past semester is quite a bit different because by that point, a number of students on the campus had gotten to know me through masses and so forth. So the students who signed up for my class this past semester were for the most part quite religious. But yeah, I mean, it really is fascinating to kind of see the different experiences that young people have had. And even for my generation, and especially the case for, perhaps a previous generation, almost everyone would have had, at least some religious vocabulary and probably some religious
Hmm.
experience. Some of the students I'm encountering really have no religious experience at all. They have never gone to a church, for example. One of the students in my class this past semester, and she was kind of exceptional in the group in that she really didn't come from a religious background at all, but she was excited to tell me just after Easter that she went to church for the first time on Easter Sunday. That probably would not have been so common, in a previous generation, but it's not so unusual today.
I think younger kids, but also even possibly like on our generation as well, we always thought of vocation just as kind of going into religious life. And actually, I've found personally, like growing up, that vocation does include marriage. It includes, there's a vast array of vocations. Do you find that with the group these days, that vocation still is kind of religious life, or do they understand more that vocation actually includes all of it?
So I would say that that word discernment, at least for some, they might think about it in terms of a religious vocation. But I would say many today would recognize that, all of us need to discern, and that vocation has a much broader sense than a priestly or religious vocation. I would say, however, that many young people, even if they know that in the abstract, that, okay, everyone has a vocation and that discernment is something that all of us are called to do, many may not necessarily be equipped very well with kind of skills for doing that discernment.
That's really good to point out, because I think discernment, again, was something that I didn't actually think I had to do when I was younger. It's more of discerning which guy to marry instead of what God's calling me to be.
Mhm.
So, what sorts of skills or tools do you think would be most helpful for them?
Yeah. So even before coming to Loyola, and actually, okay, when I was previously living in the US and then I was out of the country for a while, and then I came back to Loyola a year ago, I was kind of going around the Midwest and giving a retreat that I entitled "What Should I Do?" A very relevant question for young people. It was very popular, and actually, I kind of did it again this past year. And in that retreat, I tried to teach some of the principles of Ignatian discernment, while at the same time, I also tried to, integrate some kind of principles from the modern psychology of decision making. And there's a lot that we really can learn. I was oftentimes frustrated when kind of these different traditions were not speaking to each other in any way. And so I have benefited greatly from some more contemporary authors writing about decision making, while at the same time, as helpful as some of those guys have been, someone like Ignatius really was a master when it came to discernment. Maybe he wasn't kind of in his initial religious conversion and fervor and so forth, but kind of over time, he really did put together some principles that are just as relevant, for us in the 21st century than they were for him in the 16th century. There are lots of practical tools that we can kind of learn from these different traditions.
And when the students are kind of discerning and working with you on that, is there a moment that you can kind of see where students start to recognize that they have to create their life with God instead of just trying to control their life constantly?
Yeah, what a great question. Yeah, I think there can be a moment in which, it really clicks for people that, okay, their religion or their relationship with God is not just something that one does at church on Sunday. Of course, that's a significant part of it, but, it's meant to kind of extend throughout the week and extend, throughout our different activities. And that, yeah, we are, okay, created in the image and likeness of God. And, our God is a creative God. And again, in one sense, God does not need us. And yet God continually invites us to be part of God's project. And of course, that takes different forms for different people. And for some, yeah, that might be, okay, something like the priesthood. But for the great majority of people, it would involve bringing one's gifts and talents that one has received from God, out into the world. And as you said, like kind of creating or co-creating with God.
I was teaching in a university setting for years and years. And I think that kind of recognition, like you were talking about with students, where they start to realize it's not all reliant on me, is a really big
Yeah.
thing. Because I think so many students, they do feel a bit of like the weight of the world is a bit on them for making these decisions and moving forward. And that moment when they start to shift to realize, actually, yeah, I can work really hard, but at the same time, I can't really do anything without God saying that it's right or it's good. I think that's a really kind of big shift in someone's
Right.
life, isn't? And it doesn't necessarily happen in uni.
Right. It's really quite freeing when we recognize that, it's not all on our shoulders. That like, okay, we are part of a much larger story that began long before we were around and it will continue after we die. And we are more than, our accomplishments or our failures. And yet that kind of freedom does not then lead us to just sit on our hands and do nothing. It's rather it can be a firm foundation from which we then try to share what we have for the greater glory of God, but without that same sort of kind of soul crushing pressure.
And I think, I mean, that transitions really well, obviously, into your book of Freedom Missing Out, which I absolutely loved. We listened to an audiobook of it because we were driving and it was like a 10-hour drive. And so I was like, we're just going to listen to this. So my entire family listened to it in the car. But I think that is something that I think really, sticks out in your book. Can you give us a little bit, first of all, where that idea came from for you to start fleshing out a little bit more into the book?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, the the other FOMO is much more well known. The fear of missing out, which has been talked about, by countless people in terms of, particular pressure, I think experienced by many of us, but maybe in a special way for younger people to try to keep one's options open so that we don't, miss out on the greatest opportunity. And yet at the same time, when we try to kind of keep all of those options open, we never really give ourselves to any one or any one person or any one thing. And that can just kind of leave us stuck. And what I certainly have found in my own life, but then as I accompany, many other people, there can be, a deep freedom when we miss out by really committing ourselves, to something or to someone.
And I think too, again, because obviously you have those kind of big life moments, both with deciding that you're going to be a priest and obviously then giving up family, but then obviously you gain a
Yeah.
larger family from that.
Yep.
But also, like with the decision of getting married, because I
Right.
think a lot of young people are quite worried they're going to pick the wrong person. And you have this amazing quote in the book, which I absolutely love about this idea that it allows you to invest yourself in something and create the best option. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I love that quote from the book.
Yeah, I don't have the the text right in front of me, but
That's okay.
yeah, certainly we so worry that we will commit ourselves to one person or one thing, and then we look around and see there was a better option there. There's that danger of always thinking as if the grass is greener on the other side. But truthfully, when we're always second guessing ourselves, when we're always looking over our shoulder, inevitably, like, it's not going to be the best option because we're not diving in. And really the gold is buried in the deep. And rather than thinking as if, okay, we have to sample, billions of people to find the right one. Of course, if someone is discerning marriage, you want to find someone with whom, you have a good relationship, you share values, you're attracted to the person, so on and so forth. But, after those different criteria are met to a reasonable extent, oftentimes the best option is the one that we give ourselves to fully. And, in the context of a relationship, you and another person create something beautiful together by not looking over your shoulder, but by really giving yourselves to each other.
Definitely. And is there a specific decision or moment where letting something go created space in your own life for something better?
Certainly, the decision to, okay, join the Jesuits and become a priest was a big one. And as I mentioned before, that practically meant, not, having a family, which is something that I always assumed that I would have. And yet I reached a critical point in my discernment process when I recognized that this wasn't just kind of a hoop that I had to jump through, but really something in which I felt called. And it wasn't a rejection of love. It was kind of a channeling that love in a different manner. And then certainly too, I mentioned, having lived abroad for different times in my life. Years ago, I spent a couple of years teaching in Tanzania in East Africa. And, knowing, for example, that I was going there for that time and not returning to the States for those years, it meant, not being able to experience many different things. I missed one of my brother's weddings, for example. And yet, that period of my life was just so deeply formative. Or on a smaller scale, as a priest, I received so many invitations, and of course, I want to be generous. And at certain points, however, I'm not always perfect at doing this, and which is why, I write this book, because I'm preaching to myself. But at certain points, I recognize the need to say no to some things so that I can really kind of give myself more fully to some other commitments.
When you're creating, because you're creating over a lot of different kind of languages, if you will. You're creating the 1 minute homilies that are very, very short, very concise. And then longer essays on Substack, and then you have your books as well. Do you find that certain topics fit better in the different formats?
Yeah, there is something to the idea from Marshall McLuhan that the medium is the message. And I think that's largely correct. And now, that being said, I think we can kind of communicate, a similar message across various media. But I would say that certain media work for particular messages, and certain things can be conveyed more naturally in different forms. And so if, I'm trying to communicate a more kind of reasoned, logical argument, I think that is better, or at least more easily done with text. But I would say something like audio, and especially video, can help, really capture the emotion and the passion. And then I'd say different lengths lend themselves to different sorts of ideas as well. I make these weekly 1 minute videos, and I try to share something substantive in those 60 seconds. But of course, the kind of time constraints that I put on myself prevent me from being able to, share an argument that I could develop over the course of a book, for example. But I do appreciate the kind of the challenge and the excitement of being able to communicate in different manners, and also being able to reach different audiences.
Yeah, and the 1 minute homilies, because that was kind of actually how I refound you on Instagram, was like through these, and I was like, I know this guy. How did that come about? How did that whole kind of content creation idea come about?
I had been writing essays online for quite a while, and I was part of this project that a group of Jesuits in formation put together called the Jesuit Post. And I was managing that project and so forth. And, as is often the case, I'm just trying to kind of stay above water, and because I had so many different commitments and everything. But then it was coming to the point where I was kind of handing that project over to other Jesuits. And this was also coinciding with my ordination. And so when I was ordained, I was preaching in parishes every Sunday. And I had also seen how this was back in 2017. I had also seen how the whole social media landscape had changed tremendously from the time I first started writing essays online. When I first started, text was much more significant, but then, there really had been a movement towards images and video. And I wanted to experiment with that, but I didn't have lots of extra time. But I thought, well, okay, if I'm already putting together a homily each week anyway, it probably wouldn't take so much extra work to kind of adapt that and distill that and try to share, again, hopefully a substantive, but a short video message each week.
And how have you found the response to that? Because obviously it's been going now for a while, and social media isn't necessarily the kindest platform. But how have you found that response?
Yeah, actually, the response has been really positive. You're right. I mean, social media can be toxic at times, but it was actually quite interesting when I started because sometimes when I was writing, essays, it's really easy to forget that there is another human person on the other side. I actually found that the response was actually much more positive when I was making video, or I continue to make video, in that people could see that, okay, this was an actual human person. Now, it's quite interesting because occasionally, for whatever reason, a video of mine might, go semi-viral and kind of be picked up by the algorithm and seen by many people who do not know me, who do not know my friends, and may not be so religious and so forth. And so, okay, sometimes I can get some negative comments, but for the most part, the response has been incredibly positive. And there is something about kind of seeing and hearing a person, especially for those people who, might follow me for some years. Sometimes I might run into one of these people in person, and oftentimes the response from the person can be really quite enthusiastic, even if I did not necessarily know this person. But if someone has not just been kind of, reading what I've written, but has been, kind of hearing my voice and seeing my face and so forth over a course of years, it tends to develop a strong connection.
It certainly seems to me kind of there has been the opposite of mass exodus. So mass resurgence, if you will, of younger people back into the church, into the faith. How have you seen that, especially like on a college campus, but just in general as well?
Yeah, it's been really striking. So I just am finishing now my first year back at Loyola University Chicago. And so I wasn't there in the previous years before this one, but I've definitely heard from people who have been here for a while that, our mass attendance is way up. It's really quite striking on this particular campus, though it connects with some larger trends that I've heard about from people working on other campuses, or I've read about in countless articles kind of pointing to a related phenomenon that, at least at the university where I am, women majorly outnumber men on this campus. I want to say 70% plus female. And yet, despite that, it's really quite striking at our 9 p.m. Sunday night mass, there are more young men in the pews than young women. It's really noteworthy just to kind of see how many young people, and perhaps in a particular way, how many young men are, expressing the fact that, okay, religion is important to them. And at least on this campus, but I've heard similar stories elsewhere as well, that, they're showing up to church too. Yeah, it immediately raises all sorts of questions about, what explains this. And, maybe I have some ideas, and I'm always interested in, what, researchers and others might say.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating as well, because I'm just thinking, even like 15 plus years ago now, kind of when I was in that, college age group, and especially like for a girl going to mass, very rarely you're going to meet somebody at mass.
Right. I mean, when I was in college, when I was in high school, I mean, everything faith and service related was just dominated by young women.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
It is.
almost comical. Yeah.
It is. I mean, it's hilarious. And it is, I mean, ironic. I say this now. I mean, it's ironic. I'm aware that I met my husband at mass. So like he was like one of the few going. But I think you were saying now, like, when we go to mass, you see a ton of young men now and single men. It's not like they're being dragged by their girlfriends or things like that. Do you have any sort of ideas as to why this might be or what could possibly be encouraging this?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there is definitely a hunger for identity, a hunger for stability, in a world that is, just constantly changing. There is something deeply attractive about being part of a larger community, being part of an ancient tradition. Yeah, I'd say that's a significant part. And also, too, I mean, I think in some spaces, perhaps young men feel as if they are okay, not totally welcome, or at least they are just kind of being outshined by others. And church might be a space where they feel like they can just, okay, just be a normal person. They can kind of be embraced for who they are. I think that might be a factor too. And then too, I mean, our lives are noisy. We're constantly bombarded by notifications and so on and so forth. And there is something countercultural, maybe even punk, about like going to church and kind of being part of this non-digital, embodied, communal sort of endeavor.
Yeah, and I think as well, I mean, like, because there's this huge thing out now. I'm sure you've heard about it. Like, it was huge on our campus as well. This concept of toxic masculinity
Right.
and how this has come about. And I mean, obviously, it's been around for generations. We're just now kind of putting a name on it,
Right.
really, and how really the church offers through Saint Joseph, through Jesus as well. But I particularly like the image of Saint Joseph because he was human. But then we have loads of male saints as well too that I feel like offers a version of masculinity that a lot of these men want to be.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And it really has been striking, in the last handful of years. I mean, there are some times when it was almost as if masculinity wasn't discussed unless it was first prefaced by that word toxic. And of course, like, does toxic masculinity exist? Absolutely. Sadly, but absolutely. And yet at the same time, like as you're describing, I mean, the church can point to so many examples of kind of a non-toxic, healthy, positive masculinity. And I very much hope that for whatever motivations some of these young men might have in terms of their kind of discovery or rediscovery of the church and going to mass and so forth, that okay, they are very much influenced by those more positive versions.
Definitely. And coming back a bit now to your 1 minute homily, you have a new book, Online Pre-Evangelization. Give us a little summary about that.
Yeah, so this was coming out of my dissertation, and so I did a doctorate at the Gregorian University in Rome, and in the area of missiology, which is a, a term that the great majority of Catholics don't know what that is. Essentially, the study of mission, and definitely evangelization is very much close to my heart, and it very much informs what gets me up in the morning and kind of the different activities that I engage in. And certainly, kind of what was behind this project was wondering about how we might, reach especially more young people with the good news. I have found, joy through the gospel, through this encounter with Christ, and I want others to experience that as well. And I recognize, however, as I was saying earlier, that many people have not had a very robust practice of the faith, or maybe they've had a negative experience with different parts of the church. And not everyone is just ready to kind of be hit over the head with the catechism, for example. So I was really interested in exploring what might be some on ramps, what might be some work we could do to kind of prepare the ground such that kind of a sharing of the faith might be more effective and more likely to take root.
And I think, I mean, that is something that it's very relevant, especially with young people, this idea of kind of meeting them where they're at. And I think because, like you were saying,
Yes.
some people they're not ready to have those deeper conversations. But can you kind of paint a picture maybe about what one of those interactions might be for someone?
Yeah, well, let me give you an example from actually the class that I'm teaching here at Loyola. I'm teaching an introduction to Christian theology. This is something that students are kind of required to take. Not everyone would take this class had it not been kind of part of their core curriculum. And I recognize that not everyone is is really there and ready to kind of dive into kind of finer points of theology. And many, would not necessarily have that religious practice. That's not necessarily something that they grew up with in any sort of regular way. But I'm using a text that does share, okay, the Christian story, but it doesn't really begin there. It begins with looking at some different human longing. A desire for justice, for relationships, an attraction to beauty, a longing for spirituality, kind of looking at these rather universal kind of human desires or longings. And then after we kind of explore these more existential questions and hopefully open ourselves up to, those big ideas, then for the rest of the course, okay, I do share the Christian story and ultimately point to how, okay, Christianity responds to these human longings. But a number of the non-religious students I've had in class have expressed to me that, had I just started right away with the Trinity, they probably would not have been so receptive.
And do you think as well, I mean, because I'm just thinking, obviously there's so many mysteries in the Catholic faith that even Catholics really struggle with. Could some of those tactics, if you will, possibly be used to introduce those ideas as well?
Yes, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, what I kind of describe in this concept of pre-evangelization, I would say is very relevant for even those who might identify as Catholic or another form of Christianity, in that many of us, okay, we might say, yeah, like we kind of have a sense that, yeah, Christians believe this, X, Y, or Z mystery, but we haven't necessarily kind of wrestled with this idea. Or, for example, it makes me think of theologian Karl Rahner said that many Christians are almost mere monotheists. What he meant is that, yes, on some level, okay, the Trinity, yeah, it's part of Christianity, but many Christians haven't really dove into the fact that, like, wow, the fact that we believe in a triune God is incredible, and what that means, that our God is relationship and so forth. And yeah, kind of starting with a human longing for relationships actually kind of can be an on-ramp to getting into perhaps the deeper theology.
And it's an amazing kind of approach into it because obviously it's recognizing those basic needs that people have and that a lot of people necessarily wouldn't talk about too much. I mean, so we all have this desire to have a relationship, but then the fact that that comes from our desire to have a relationship with God, which I think is amazing. So if someone listening right now kind of feels this desire to create, so either through writing or making or teaching, but they're not entirely sure that it matters, quote unquote, spiritually, what kind of encouragement would you give to them?
I would say, go for it. Again, we're created in the image and likeness of God. Our God is a creative God. Our God invites us to be co-creators. This does not necessarily mean that, we are going to create some masterpiece. This does not mean that we're going to go viral on TikTok, nor does it mean that everyone should be on TikTok. But I would encourage people to, create in the forms that are attractive to them. I don't know whom I'm stealing this from. I apologize. It's not my own thought, but I've heard about the concept of like creative constipation, that when we sort of take in so much content, but we don't have an outlet for kind of creating our own, for, sharing from our perspective, there's something that just does not feel right. We are both created, but we are meant to be co-creators as well, sharing our gifts with the world. And again, our primary world might just be a few family members and friends. It doesn't need to be something massive or viral, but having an outlet is immensely beneficial.
Yeah, I actually, again, I don't know where this quote came from either. So if somebody knows that, that would be amazing. But I saw this thing recently that said that we were made to create. So that's why we get depressed when all we do is consume, which I just think it's so accurate, isn't it? Because when we're
Oh, for
constantly
sure.
consuming stuff on social media, you get kind of the doom scroll going on. It's just having that outlet is immensely important. Father Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. quickly just give us your Substack information just for all the listeners so they can read it as well.
Yeah, so I send out a weekly Substack, which would have a short essay and then kind of the weekly 1-minute video that I put together. So you can find that the Substack is called The Ruckus, but it's just at amdg.substack.com. So AMDG ad majorem Dei gloriam is kind of the motto for the Jesuits. So pretty easy to remember. And then I'm also easy to find on social media. On most platforms, my handle would be Rossmann SJ. That's Rossmann with a double S and a double N, and then SJ for the Society of Jesus.
Great. Thanks so much, Father Michael.
Thanks so much, Alex. It's great to be with you.
And thank you also to our sponsor, Riverside.fm, who has sponsored this episode. We use Riverside to record this episode. So if you're interested in starting a podcast or hosting a webinar, please check out Riverside.fm. I'll put the link in the description as well as in the show notes. I also want to thank Marie Miller for providing us with the music for our intro and outro. And lastly, thank you so much to all of you for listening in to this episode. Until next time, stay creative and keep making what matters most.